Well, hello everyone. Thanks for attending the presentation today. I'm going to be speaking with you about ergonomics and carpenters. So understanding some of the hazards and developing some solutions. As Trevor mentioned, my name is Andrew Flanagan. I'm an ergonomist at the Sarnia Oak Health Clinic. And before I get into the presentation, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on myself. My interest in doing a presentation for ergonomics and carpenters today kind of comes from a bit of my experience in working prior to becoming an ergonomist. While I was in school throughout summers, by no means, first of all, I should say, am I a carpenter, but I did work with a carpenter, kind of as a carpenter's helper, as a laborer. So I am throughout summers, uh, summers between school terms, and following my education for a couple of short periods of time, I did work with a carpenter. So I'm familiar with some of the residential tasks, um, like framing windows, doors, decks, roofing, building fences, siding. So I'm familiar with some of the tasks and the tools that are associated with performing these tasks. So just a quick summary of what we're going to go through today and kind of the outcome goals that I'm hoping to achieve. I'm hoping to provide an introduction to ergonomics, to demonstrate the need for ergonomic training amongst carpenters, and in particular carpenters who are new to the trade. I'm hoping to provide an introduction to MSDs and hazards that can lead to the development of MSDs or musculoskeletal disorders. And then finally, I'm hoping to offer some solutions and an assessment method for controlling these hazards. Okay, so this is a screenshot that I took of my computer screen. So if I open up Google and I type in ergonomics, this is what I see. So this is also what my family members and friends think that I do. I mention ergonomics to most people and they'll think, oh, you must adjust chairs, you work with people at their desks, at their computer workstations. And certainly that is a component of ergonomics. But it's kind of a small side part of it. So really, ergonomics is the study of the design of work in relation to the physiological and psychological capabilities of people. So I wanted to give a couple examples just to put in perspective of where I think good examples as they relate to carpentry. So the first thing that I kind of thought of was building stairs. So when we build stairs, we design there's some standards, and we design the rise height and the tread depth to accommodate people, to accommodate the anthropometrics of people. And I'll touch on anthropometrics in a minute here, but we design these to accommodate the size of people so that it feels natural to walk up the stairs. We don't make an extreme rise height and a very short tread depth just to take up less space, just because it would be uncomfortable and unnatural to walk up. So that's an example of ergonomics in carpentry. I think maybe the most obvious example that comes to mind for me of ergonomics in carpentry would be the use of sawhorses. So using sawhorses to bring our materials that we're working with up off of the floor. So, if we're unloading a load of 2x4s, load them onto sawhorses, or if we're cutting materials, we can place plywood or sheet goods on sawhorses. And it not only allows us to maintain more neutral postures as we work, but it also allows us to use our tools more accurately, to make more accurate cuts. And so sawhorse is a great example of ergonomics. Final example that I have was a tool belt. So we get these tool belts and they have all these pouches, and you can put your tools in them however you feel best suits them, I guess. But generally speaking, you're going to arrange your tool belt so that you have the quickest, easiest access to your tools. So you can reach down and grab your tape measure, and it's in its place where you expect it to be, and it just allows you to work effectively and efficiently. So a common term that goes along with ergonomics is working smarter, not harder. And I had to include these two examples because in my most recent experience in carpentry, I was well along my way to becoming an ergonomist, and the person that I was working with was very aware of this. And so these are both toolboxes. The picture on the left is a router case, and that is the specific router case that I had this experience with. So I'm struggling to put this tool away in this case, There weren't any instructions on how to put it in place or how it was supposed to be sitting in the box. And I'm struggling with it for probably 5 minutes trying to get this thing closed. And the carpenter that I was working for comes over and says, come on, put it in place. It's ergonomics, right? And I thought about it more and more, and I realized like it really is ergonomics, because adding labels would be a way to improve the user interaction with these boxes. So with putting these tools away, it would reduce the psychological demand so greatly if we could just label these boxes. So that is an example of ergonomics. Okay, getting into the ergonomic approach. So when we approach problems that can lead to risk factors for the contribution for the development of musculoskeletal disorders, we always want to try and take a proactive approach. And the example that I thought of for having this approach would be, the first example anyway, our saw blades. So for example, the blades that we use when we are working on our saws, so table saw or our skill saw, we know that we're going to be making a certain amount of cuts per day over the weeks and months. And so we have two options really. We can either continue to use our tools and wear down these blades and continue to make cuts and wear down the blades until it becomes an issue, and possibly an accident occurs, and maybe it's just an inaccurate cut that results in a waste of material, or maybe it's an injury that occurs from the additional force that's required to push these dull blades through material. Or we can take a proactive approach to this, and we can say, we're making so many cuts every week, so probably every month we should be replacing our blades with a sharper blade to complete these tasks. So that's a good example of having a proactive approach. Another example that comes to mind would be ladder inspections. So when we do ladder inspections, we don't continue to climb ladders and put ladders in and out of our trucks and trailers and transport them around and bang them up. There's a reason that we inspect the ladder prior to the climb. The reactive solution to this would be not inspecting until your ladder hopefully never happens, but possibly fails. The proactive approach is, of course, performing some sort of ladder inspection to check for damage. The final example would be setting a limit for how much one person can safely lift on a job site. So if we see a person, we have two options really. We can either continue to let people lift goods and materials around until they sustain an injury, or we can set a limit for how much one person can safely lift before they need to seek an alternative solution. Maybe that's lifting with a coworker. So we should always be keeping the proactive approach in mind when thinking solving problems. Okay, and I mentioned I was going to touch on briefly on anthropometrics. So anthropometry is the science that defines the physical measures of a person's size, form, and functional capabilities. So in this picture here that I put together, on the left, we can see a 5th percentile female. So she's 5 feet and 3/4 of an inch tall, 154.4 centimeters. On the right, we see a 95th percentile male who is 6 feet tall, or 183 centimeters in stature. So when we're designing for these two people, an example that I thought of would be if we were designing, say, safe clearances for the heights of a doorway or a walkway. So when we design for doorways and walkways, we're going to design these based on the requirements for the larger individual, because we know that the smaller individual will be able to still complete the tasks effectively, and vice versa. If we were going to be setting a rule in place for the maximum shelf height that we could store materials in the workplace, we would set this maximum height for the 5th percentile or the smaller individual, as opposed to for the larger individual, simply because the smaller individual wouldn't be able to complete the task. Okay, so why ergonomics? Why do we need ergonomics, and why is it something that we should even consider implementing into our workplace? So according to the WSIB, MSDs represent over 40% of all lost time compensation claims in Ontario. So looking at the indirect and direct costs from a period from 1996 to 2006, That would amount, the amount from that period amounted to about $19 billion. So it's certainly costly. The construction industry is in the top 3 occupations for work-related musculoskeletal disorders. The construction industry in particular had the 4th highest rate of lost time claims in Canada. The 2 most common injury types within these claims were overexertion and sprains and strains, which are both musculoskeletal disorders. 11% of all lost time injuries in Ontario are MSDs. And aside from the financial burden of workplace injuries, MSDs reduce productivity and can become permanently disabling. So they can end up, MSDs can result in a disability that can permanently affect an individual. Okay, so building into this need for this presentation, when I was initially thinking about it, I really wanted to get some sort of survey out there to be able to get feedback from carpenters. So what I did was I put a survey together, and I was able to distribute it. So the survey consisted of, survey consisted of 11 questions. It was distributed to local carpentry companies, Carpenters District Council of Ontario, the Ontario Carpenters Union, and the College of Carpenters and Allied Trades. It's not representative of the work of all carpenters just because of the variety of work that carpenters complete. So for example, I know that there are some carpenters who spend significantly more time forming or working with scaffolding as opposed to residential carpenters. So I'll just quickly go through the questions that I asked and the results that I found from these questions. So the first question I asked, just to gauge a sense of who was responding to the survey, was how long have you been working as a carpenter? And 50% of the respondents had worked less than 5 years. And from the 6 to 20-year ranges, there was a pretty even distribution. So I had a pretty good spread of different ages and different experience levels here. Question number 2 was, which tasks do you consider to be the most physically challenging that you complete daily? So there were some trends here. You can see carrying sheet goods, carrying lumber, chain handling materials, climbing, high or low tasks, lifting and carrying materials. I won't read them all, but you get the idea here. There's a lot of trends of carrying, handling, material handling. Question number 3 was, which tasks do you consider to be the most difficult that you complete only occasionally, so weekly or monthly? And again, I saw similar tasks, so it's just similar trends here. So carrying prop jacks, roping materials, carrying form panels, organizing gear, putting it away, working low, heavy lifting, crouching, kneeling during a variety of tasks. So again, we see some trends here. There's a lot of heavy lifting, and a lot of things. If they didn't use a word that directly related to lifting, carrying, or that directly said lifting and carrying, sorry, they indicated that they were probably doing some sort of high or low work. So flooring, baseboards, and drywalling ceilings, for example, would be an example of low and high work. Question number 4 was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how physically demanding would you rate your work? 1 being not physically demanding and 10 being extremely physically demanding. The average rating that I received from these responses was 6.17 out of 10. So that indicates that most of the respondents of this survey, or the average rating anyway, was they believed that their work was very physically demanding. The lowest rating was a 4, and the highest rating was a 10. So there were certainly no respondents that didn't think that they had physically demanding work. On a scale of, question number 5 was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much discomfort or pain do you experience on a regular basis? The average rating was 3.67. So that would indicate that most of these workers were experiencing mild to moderate pain, and the lowest rating being a 2 and the highest rating being an 8. Question number 6 was, which region of the body do you experience pain or discomfort in? And this aligns with the trends that we see in injuries amongst this industry. So The highest percentage of pain or discomfort was experienced in the mid to low back, followed by upper limb, so hands, wrists, elbows, lower limb, hips, knees, ankles, feet. Shoulders followed that. 2 people said that they did not experience any pain or discomfort, and then 1 was other. Question 7, I asked, which tools do you use that cause the most pain or discomfort? What I should add for these questions, where I was asking them to reply, they were entering in these responses. So they could enter in as much as they'd like. So the common trend here became tools that were commonly used during demolition. So chipping guns, hammer drill, heavy tools for demolition, hammer, pry bars, demolition hammer. And then again, we see some low tasks or tasks that require bad postures, like using the hardwood floor nailer. So again, the trends are still there. Which tool do you use that is the most physically demanding? So I just wanted to see if they associated the physically demanding tasks with with how much discomfort they experienced while using these tools. So again, we saw a lot of demolition tools. Question 9, does pain or discomfort cause you to worry about the longevity of your career? 42% of the respondents said yes, 58% said no. So this, to me, indicates that almost half the people who are working that responded to this survey do worry about like the longevity of their career, and they probably question whether or not they'll be able to physically continue to work in their career, depending on what happens and how their body holds up. Question 10 was, have you ever, I see some questions coming in and I'm just holding off on answering them, and I'll try to address them following the presentation. But keep them coming, thank you. So question 10 was, have you ever had any training specific to ergonomics? So 92% of the respondents had not had any training, and 8% did have some training. And the final question here was, do you believe that ergonomic training can reduce injuries or prevent injuries from occurring? And so with this question, 83% of respondents said yes, and 17% said no. So I found this very interesting. You know, such a small percentage of people had received any ergonomic training, and excuse me, and such a large percentage of them believed that some sort of training could prevent injuries from occurring. So to summarize the survey, most respondents believe that their work is very physically demanding. Many respondents experience mild to moderate pain or discomfort. Demolition tasks, manual material handling, working low or working high were the tasks that were commonly associated with increased discomfort or pain at work. Demolition tools, vibrating tools, tools that require repetitive use were the tools that most commonly were reported as causing discomfort or pain. Nearly half of the workers were concerned about the longevity of their career. Only 8% had ergonomic training. And finally, 83% of the respondents believed that there was value in ergonomic training. So to me, this said that there really is a need for some sort of ergonomic training amongst carpenters. And there are plenty of resources that are already created that have been developed, and I'll touch on them kind of at the end. But I think just making these available and just educating workers that these resources exist, or carpenters that these resources exist, is very important. And to continue demonstrating the need for ergonomic intervention amongst carpenters, and particularly among young workers. So there's this interesting study, it's titled The Assessment of Upper Extremity Postures in Novice and Expert during Simulated Carpentry Tasks. It was completed by Ahmed and Babinski Reeves in 2012. So this study evaluated the upper extremity postures during carpentry tasks between novice and experienced workers. So they defined a novice worker as someone who had 3 years or less of experience. And within Ontario, I think our apprenticeship requirements fall within about 3 years. So that would qualify apprentices. So it really, yeah, novices, 3 years or less experience, and experienced workers. Experienced workers, it was 3 years or greater, and it was people who had minimal injury or history of lost time. So they completed 2 tasks. One was a deck building task where the participants were asked to install the deck planks, as you can see in the picture to the left. This isn't a picture from the actual study. This is just a picture I've grabbed to use as an example. They're installing deck planks with nails. Participants secured each board with 2 nails at each end and along each of the joists of the deck. And then the second task was installing spindles to the deck railing. So that would be like on the second image that you see there on the right. All of the materials and tools were provided. So they used a 16 camera motion capture system to track the upper extremity postures of the carpenters performing these tasks. And they ultimately found that novices assumed more non-neutral postures than experienced carpenters. So to me, this just says that there is a need for implementation of some sort of ergonomic training for young carpenters or young workers to help them bridge that gap without having to take extreme duration of time, months, years, to acquire those skills to understand how to put themselves in better postures. And just to add to the need for training for younger workers, so workers 24 and under, a 2010 Canadian Community Health Survey showed that 16% of those aged 20 to 24 had sustained a serious injury at work. Serious injuries were defined as injuries which occurred in the past 12 months and were serious enough to limit your normal activities the day following the injury, so the day after the injury occurred. This survey also demonstrated that the incidence of injuries among young employees, or employees 24 and under, was almost twice as high as that of older employees in Canada. An additional study, so this is a study by Taylor and Watt Malcolm in 2008, that evaluated youth apprentices in carpentry in Ontario, asserted the need for change in workplace safety cultures, finding that youth often received conflicting messages in the classroom as opposed to what they had learned, in the workplace as opposed to what they had learned in the classroom. So each of these things just kind of add to that need for ergonomic training for youth. So now that we've kind of established that there is a need for ergonomic intervention or ergonomic training in carpenters, and in particular young carpenters, we're going to get into musculoskeletal disorders, the musculoskeletal system. So MSDs are disorders that affect our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments, nerves, our bursa, blood vessels, and spinal discs. So these are the soft tissues of our body. MSDs are often also called repetitive strain injuries or overuse injuries. There are some other terms that are often interchangeably used. Different types of musculoskeletal disorders that exist that we hear commonly and that are particularly relative to the world of carpentry are sprains, strains, carpal tunnel syndrome, hand-arm vibration syndrome, tendinitis, disc herniation, and overexertion. So these are all injuries that are related to our musculoskeletal system. Okay, so some MSD hazards, and I'm going to get into each of these in greater detail. But we have force, posture, so we have awkward or sustained posture, repetition, contact stress, hot or cold stress, and vibration. So the first hazard I guess to bring up is force. So in these pictures, we can see the image on the left. These workers are raising a wall. So they've likely lifted this wall that's constructed right from floor level So they've had to bend to lift it. And the image on the right, we can see these two workers that are installing a beam overhead. And I imagine it's quite a bit of force required to lift that up there. And you can see they're both basically at the maximum reach. So there's two different kinds of forces. There's external forces, and these are forces that are applied to the body by outside objects. So that would be, both of these images would be showing examples of external forces. And then we also have internal forces. So internal forces are generated by muscles in response to task demands. So an example of that would be the force required at your shoulder or neck to support the arm. So if you stand up and stretch your arm out to the side, it doesn't take too long before you realize that the weight of your arm does apply quite a bit of force to your shoulder and neck. So that's an example of an internal force. Next hazard would be posture. So we have a couple different types of postures. Excuse me. So we have awkward postures. So the muscles operate less efficiently and more force must be expended to do the task. Examples of awkward postures include overhead reaching, bending down, or twisting. So we can see in this picture here, this worker is bent right over, basically as far as he can go, to acquire the task. Sorry, I just lost my screen. Okay, all right, we're good. Sorry about that. So this worker is bent over as far as he can go in an awkward posture. We also have static postures. So static postures can increase the risk of injury, restricting blood flow, and reducing the ability of your body to deliver oxygen and nutrients to your muscles. So this person nailing down sheets of OSB onto the roof here, it's likely that he's being handed a sheet of plywood and he's continuing to nail until the task is done. So he's likely bent over for extended periods of time, using this nail gun, reaching forward with his arm. So that leads us into neutral postures. So neutral postures are what we always seek to achieve. An example here, you can see the hand that is straight at the wrist. It's relaxed, and you can see all of the different positions here. And there's an example that I wanted to give from a presentation that I actually just watched yesterday. It was from an ergonomist named Mark Heidebrecht. I hope I said his name right. He did this during his presentation, and I thought that's so cool. So I'm going to borrow it and use it in mine today. It's just so relevant. So what I would like everybody to do is extend your hand at your side in a neutral posture, as you can see in the picture here, and then make a fist with your hand and squeeze your fist, and you can try to apply some force as you squeeze, and you can feel your strength in your hand. Okay. Now what I would like everybody to do is flex at your wrist. So we can see in the bottom right picture here that demonstrates wrist flexion. So once your wrist is flexed, I'd like you to make that same clenched fist and try and squeeze your hand. And you can feel how much less force you're able to generate in that posture. Okay, that's an example of a non-neutral posture. And the amount of force that is reduced there is quite significant. So this is something just to keep in mind. I mean, when I think about framing walls, maybe we're using a nail gun and we're reaching around posts or beams to use the nail gun, and we're bending at the wrist to get into the right position, and then constantly using the trigger on the gun. So just consider how much less force we're able to generate with our wrist flexed, as opposed to if we were to step around the wall and then work in a neutral posture to use the gun. Even though it might take a little bit longer, it's going to let us work a lot more safely. Another example of a neutral posture here, and we could apply these neutral postures to all aspects of the body. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are just to give you a couple examples. So This is a neutral posture of the neck. So we can see in the top left picture the example of the neutral posture and then all of the other positions. So whenever possible, we want to try to maintain neutral body position. When we design tasks, we should be trying to optimize neutral body positions as much as possible. So Kodak's ergonomic design for people at work from 2004, they define neutral posture as the position of least stress or highest strength for the joint. So neutral postures are the safest and most efficient ways for our bodies to work. Okay, moving on to repetition. So in this image here, this person is using a pry bar or crowbar to remove some old hardwood flooring. And they're going to be just repetitively applying a force to that bar with their arms to tear up flooring, I assume, until the task is done. So they're using the same muscles, the same tendons, and other soft tissues repeatedly, and they're giving their muscles little chance of rest or recovery. And this can ultimately result in injury. Okay, contact stress. So looking at these two images here, this person installing a hardwood floor, you can see that they're down on their knees, not wearing any knee pads. So that would be an example of contact stress. Contact stress happens when a body, sorry, contact stress happens when a force is concentrated on a small area of the body. So pinching or crushing tissue or causing discomfort and often pain. In the example on the right, I don't know how many of you have had the experience of working from a ladder for extended periods of time, but you can see that his legs are slightly leaned forward. And if you spend enough time there, that the rungs of the ladder really, the force can really push into your legs. So that's another example of contact stress. Third example of contact stress that I didn't post a picture of, but would be the harnesses that we wear. So when we're working at heights, you know, heavy harnesses can be heavy, or maybe our tool belt that we have to wear. If we have extreme amount of weight on our tool belt, which hopefully we don't, those are things that could contribute to contact stress. Okay, hot or cold work. So in extreme temperatures, in the cold, muscles and tendons become less flexible. So the blood circulation is reduced to our hands and our arms. And then in hot or humid work, it just imposes an additional strain on the body that can increase dehydration as our bodies work to cool themselves. So hot or cold conditions can increase the risk for musculoskeletal disorders. Okay, vibration. So segmental vibration. There's two types of vibration. Segmental vibration being the first that I'll discuss. So these are like hand-arm vibrations. These are often caused by pneumatic tools, jackhammers, could be caused by chainsaws, grinders, any tool really that we have to hold on to that's going to cause a direct vibration to what we're holding on, or to our hands and arms that we're holding it with. And then we also have whole body vibrations. So if a worker is sitting or standing directly on a vibrating surface, the vibrations can be transmitted to the entire body. So this would be like maybe driving heavy equipment. And the risk of vibration-induced injury, it depends on the average daily exposure. So evaluation of the risks takes into account the intensity of the vibration, the frequency of the vibration, duration of the exposure, and the part of the body that receives the vibrating energy. So prolonged exposure to vibration can lead to the development of MSDs. Okay, so those are the hazards that can contribute to the development of MSDs. And finally, the most significant, I guess, hazard that can contribute to MSDs is the combination of these risk factors. So in these images, in particular the image on the left, you can see this worker is gripping a flooring nailer. Those things are not light. I don't have the actual weight offhand, but he's essentially bent over at the back, using the hammer to hit this nail gun and insert the nail into the floor. And then he'll lift the nailer take a step over and continue the process. If you have somebody that's really speedy, handing you the hardwood floor, if it's lined up properly, as it looks like it is here, this process can go pretty quick, and this person could end up being in this posture of the back for extended periods of time. So there's a combination of force and posture. And in the picture on the right, we see these two people working on some scaffolding overhead, installing a sheet of drywall. So the postures that we recognize here would be they're working with their hands overhead, so that's not a good posture. They're also looking upwards, so there's some extension of the neck. And then to add to this and compound it, the weight of the drywall that they're holding overhead. So any individual hazard can contribute to the development of MSDs, but the combination of these hazards, it creates a much more severe risk. Okay, and again, so this is just a pyramid that shows how repetition, force, or awkward posture can contribute to the development of MSDs. And the more that these things are combined, the more significant the degree of risk becomes and is also increased. So we have two ways, I guess, that we can sustain MSDs. So the first being chronic. So if we look at this this graph here, we see a line that represents tissue tolerance, and we see a line that represents load. And the way I like to think when I look at this this model is that each of these humps along the load line would represent a worker lifting something throughout their day. So maybe this line represents an entire 8-hour workday. And we can see that over the course of the 8-hour workday, the line that represents tissue tolerance gradually decreases, okay? And over time, as that line of tissue tolerance decreases, the margin of safety becomes less and less. So at the beginning of the day, our tissues are well rested and fresh. And as the day goes on, tasks that we complete contribute to wearing down our tissues. And so then the day ends, and the worker goes home and rests for the day, and you can see the load decreases and the tissue tolerance line builds back up. Now, if the tissue tolerance line, or maybe this worker was asked to work a little bit of overtime, they stick around for an extra hour to complete a task, and their tissue tolerance continually declines as they continue to perform lifts, eventually an injury would occur. Or could occur, I should say. The other type of MSD would be an acute MSD. So this is something that happens much more instantly. So acute MSDs occur more suddenly, often from sudden exposure to a load that's too great for the tissue tolerance. So thinking of maybe somebody throws you something, or if something falls off of a ladder and you catch it, and maybe when you catch that item, you're standing in a bad posture, you're twisted at your back. And ultimately, even though there's not a significant duration of exposure, the load is just so great that it overcomes the tissue tolerance, and an acute injury can occur. So when we think acute injuries, speaking of injuries that occur suddenly. Okay, so now that we've kind of gained a general understanding of how ergonomics relates to carpentry, we've discussed what an MSD is, what the types of MSDs are, and we've discussed some MSD hazards. We're going to move forward and look at a model that can be used to approach and control hazards. So this is the hierarchy of controls from NIOSH, and essentially what it does is it prioritizes how we should approach implementing controls to hazards that we find on the workplace, or in the workplace, sorry. So we can see at the top of this pyramid, the most effective method of control is elimination. So physically removing the hazard. If we can take the hazard right out of the workplace, then we don't have to worry about it anymore, really. The next most effective is substitution. So replacing the hazard. So, if we can swap a lighter material in for a heavier material out for a lighter material, that's not going to require as much force for us to lift. That would be an example of substitution. Engineering controls. So these isolate people from the hazard. So we would use things, or in carpentry, we'd see things like lifts, different mechanisms that can help with lifting sheet materials like handles, hoists, etc. And we'll get into specific examples of these. Administrative controls change the way that people work. So an administrative control would be like I gave the example earlier of being proactive and implementing a rule that says that once that certain materials need to be lifted by 2 workers. So an administrative control could be saying that, to handle sheet materials, because of the awkward postures required, we need to have 2 workers handling these sheet materials. And then finally, the least effective, but still effective, is PPE. So protecting the worker with personal protective equipment. And an example of that would be like the knee pads that we saw on, or the worker who was installing the hardwood floor without knee pads. So a good improvement for them could be to wear some knee pads. That would be PPE. Excuse me. Okay, so getting into these and breaking a couple down, I just wanted to go through a couple examples from the questions that were put, or from the feedback that I got from my survey. So handling sheet materials was one of the most commonly reported tasks that caused discomfort, or that people found to be people found to require great exertion. So can we eliminate the requirement to handle sheet materials? Well, so we can control where the delivery of the truck is dropped off when it comes from the lumberyard. We can plan to have them drop it as close to where we're going to be using it as possible. But really, at some point, plywood or sheet materials are going to have to be handled, even if that means just getting them onto a lift. So I would say we can't eliminate handling sheet materials, unfortunately. Can we substitute handling sheet materials? So in most cases, the sheet material that we've chosen is chosen for a reason. Of course, there's building requirements that require certain thicknesses of material, and some are heavier than others. Whether it be drywall or plywood, it's used for a reason. So we really can't substitute these sheet materials out for an alternative. So I'd say substitution is not really possible with regard to handling sheet materials. Engineering controls. So yes, for sure, I think this is where we would see some great solutions for handling these sheet materials. So things like mechanical lifts, carts, or gripping handles that can be used to handle and move sheet materials more safely and more effectively. Administrative controls. Again, yes, we can implement lifting rules, such as a team lift, that would reduce the one worker's requirement to handle sheet materials. PPE. I mean, there are things like gloves, I guess. So maybe I'm wrong here, but things like gloves, which could help you grip the materials more securely and help you do the job more effectively. So certainly, maybe there are some PPE solutions that could improve this. Okay, another example: flooring work, so low work. Is elimination possible? Whenever we can assemble things at a higher level and then bring them down to a lower level, that might eliminate the need to work in sustained postures bent over for sustained periods of time. So with regard to installing flooring, it's probably unlikely, but I think we should always be thinking about, can we put things together, or maybe if we're doing like a subfloor, for example, rather than bringing the material in and cutting it while it's on the floor down low, working on it on top of a 2x4 or something, if we can cut the materials outside on a sawhorse at a more appropriate level in a safer posture, we're probably going to be able to make more accurate cuts and work more safely. So I think we should just always be thinking about, can we construct something before putting it into place in a proper posture before we have to get down low or up high and work with it in that situation. So I'm going to say maybe for elimination. Maybe possible to assemble in neutral postures before installing. So substitution. Unfortunately, at some point, if you're installing a floor, you're going to happen this, the low work is required. So it can't really be substituted. Engineering controls. So definitely there are engineering controls, and we can see in the picture here, the person has the nailing gun, and there are longer handles that are available for these guns. So that would help you work in a more neutral posture. Or if you're doing a subfloor, for example, you're putting that on subfloor, and you're putting in, hundreds of screws, rather than using your drill bent over in a non-neutral posture on your knees, there are these extensions available to automatically load the drill and allow you to work in a more neutral posture. And it's actually much quicker, so it's much more efficient as well. Administrative controls. So yes, definitely we can limit how much time someone should be working in a low position before they're required to take a rest, for example. And finally, PPE. The example I mentioned before of the person wearing knee pads would be an example of PPE. So yes, there's PPE available. And the final thing that I wanted to touch on, just to reinforce this need for a safe culture in workplaces, is the internal responsibility system. So everyone in the workplace has a role to play in keeping workplaces safe and healthy. Ergonomic programs and hazard controls can only be effective when there's buy-in from all stakeholders. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act is really built upon the internal responsibility system. So beginning with the employer has the greatest responsibility with respect to health and safety in the workplace and is responsible for taking every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of a worker. The employer is responsible for ensuring that the IRS, the internal responsibility system, is established, promoted, and that it functions successfully. Supervisors are responsible for making workers supervisors are responsible for making workers fully aware of hazards that they may encounter on the job or in the workplace and ensuring that they work safely. Responding to any of the hazards brought to their attention, including taking every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of a worker. And finally, workers. So worker responsibilities include reporting hazards in the workplace, working safely, following safe work practices, using required personal protective equipment for the job at hand, participating in health and safety programs that have been established for the workplace. So every stakeholder and every work party here has a role to play. And really, the mindset needs to be that everyone can contribute to this. From the newest workers to the most experienced workers, everyone needs to contribute to keeping the workplaces safe, just so that things like this that you can see in this photo here, this worker carrying 2 bundles of shingles up onto a roof, really shouldn't exist. In a workplace that has a well-established internal responsibility system, somebody should be calling this person out for doing this, or the supervisor should be addressing this issue. Okay, so to summarize the presentation, I had a couple of outcome goals. So I wanted to demonstrate the need for ergonomic training amongst carpenters, in particular carpenters who are new to the trade. So I think we did that. I wanted to introduce ergonomics to carpenters, introduce MSDs and the hazards that can lead to the development of MSDs, and then provided a model for controlling hazards and implementing changes in the workplace. So, and I just wanted to say that resources are available. So there's a lot of good organizations within Ontario for workers. In particular, the Center for Research Expertise for the Prevention of Musculoskeletal Disorders. They have a lot of good resources on their website. And if you have any questions about this, send me an email and I'm happy to provide you links to their website and to some of these resources. But in particular, they have MSD prevention guidelines and a basic step-by-step, as well as a comprehensive guide to implementing ergonomics programs in your workplace. They have some guides for heavy, frequent, awkward lifting strategies, frame wall lifting, stand up auto feed screw gun, as I showed in one of my slides, talking about subflooring. And then also the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety has some really good resources on their website related to tasks that carpenters complete. So handling sheet materials, team handling, powered hand tools, pushing and pulling, mechanical aids for transporting materials, and then of course OCOW is available. We have a team of ergonomists that are happy to reach out to help you or to help you develop solutions for any problems that you come to us with. So if you have something in mind after watching this presentation, or you think of a task that you know that causes you a lot of discomfort, and maybe you want to try and come up with a solution for it, I'd be happy to hear from you by email. And I mentioned that there would be some homework. So don't worry, you don't actually have to submit anything. My challenge to you, I guess, for homework would be next time you're out working in your field of carpentry, I want you to think about what tasks or tools you're aware of that you think could be improved. And if you think of something and you're really interested by this, I'd like you to share them with me. And just challenge yourself to create solutions and to try and minimize risks for of MSDs. And finally, I have a link here to the survey that I presented. So I know that this is a presentation, so you can't click the link. But again, if you reach out to me by email following this presentation, I will make sure that the link is sent to you. So references, and now I'd open the floor for any questions.
So the first one is, it was a statement that sort of opened up into a question was, I used to work as a roofer. I found the lower leg static posture and foot dorsiflexion to be quite fatiguing. Can you explain why?
Well, I mean, so when you're standing on a roof, right, your foot is, if you're facing, I guess, if you're facing into the slope of the roof, your foot is going to be dorsiflexed, which means that your foot is flexing up towards your knee. So you're pointing your toes up towards your knees, I guess. And it's a sustained posture as you stand on that roof for extended periods of time. So I mean, I can relate to this. I spent some time roofing myself, and I certainly know what you mean. In particular, I think if you were the person that was using the nail gun to install the shingles down on the roof, then you're always facing, or pretty much always facing upward in this posture. So I guess my answer would just be that it's the cause is likely just the posture that you're forced to sustain for extended periods of time. And a solution to that would be taking breaks as you're able, just to stand up and stretch your legs, and turn into some different postures, just to move your ankles around and allow your ankles and your lower limbs to relax.
Another question was, can you think of other ways to mitigate vibration besides reducing duration of exposure? Typically in our rehab setting, it has really been a gradual progression of the functional tolerances, as employers are often not open to funding alternative equipment.
So aside from reducing the limited exposure, I think gloves I know there's gloves that exist that offer vibration dampening. But you mentioned if your employer doesn't want to support them. I'm not sure what the cost of these gloves are. So that would be one possible solution. I think it would depend on the willingness of your employer to fund it. But aside from that, if that doesn't satisfy your question, if you could email me, I'd be happy to respond in more detail.
And then there's a follow-up question to that. Are there certain hurt ranges or feature types on equipment that should be avoided when purchasing regarding vibration?
Sorry, Trevor, could you say that one more time?
Yeah, so as a follow-up question regarding the vibration, are there certain hertz ranges or feature types on equipment that should be avoided when purchasing?
So again, I don't know offhand, but if you, again, email me that question, or maybe if, well, I'll be able to see the recording of this so I can, yeah, no, email me the question, I guess is the best way to solve it, because I don't know offhand, to be honest with you.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of questions that were focused on your survey. Everyone loves a good survey. First one was, how many respondents completed the survey?
So there were 12 respondents in the survey.
Well, okay.
So it was fairly limited. I think I mentioned that at the beginning. I didn't say how many there were, but I did say that it wasn't representative of all of the carpenters of Ontario, just because of the limited sample size.
Right. Was there an age range that you looked at for it?
No, I didn't really take any demographics besides the questions that you saw. So I don't, I didn't track who was completing it or how old they were. I guess we could kind of estimate age based on how many years they had been, that they reported that they worked as carpenters. But aside from that, I don't know much about the other demographics.
And that statement leads right to the next question. Is there any correlation between the length of career and the physical demand and discomfort ratings?
Well, that's a great question. And
Sounds like grounds for a future research study.
yeah, yeah. Off the top of my head, certainly from the survey that I created, I don't think that there would be enough respondents to like accurately say. But we do know that younger workers are more likely to sustain injuries at work. So I mean, and maybe if you email me that question again, sorry to keep going back to email me these questions, but I think I could much better answer for you by email.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions being entered, Andrew.
All right.
So I would like to thank everyone for attending our third event, and hope to see you all again next week for our fourth and final one. So take care and have a wonderful day.